Welcome to the Business Disrupted podcast series brought to you by Samsung. I'm your host, Eric Qualman, and together with guests who include today's pioneering IT execs and technology visionaries, I'll bring you the insights you need to better serve your company, customers, and workforce with the latest digital technologies. In today's episode, we're examining the evolving role of mobile security in the enterprise. Organizations have been learning the hard way about the devastating impacts that a security breach can have. The experts agree it's time to make security a priority for your entire business, not just IT. If that sounds daunting to you, you're not alone. Today we'll talk about technology solutions and strategies that help you strike that delicate balance between supporting business growth and securely managing mobile devices. I have with me here two IT visionaries and veterans who are successfully driving business transformation with security central to the mix. Let's hear what they have to say. Let me introduce John Hill, Chief Information Officer at Carhartt, a premium workwear brand. John is a leading technology executive with more than 20 years of multi-industry experience spanning automotive, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, software as a service, insurance, government, and high technology. His combination of IT and business experience, as well as his ability to put strategy into action, has distinguished him throughout his career. At Carhartt, John has been integral to structuring cybersecurity policy and operations. We're thrilled to have him share his firsthand experience here. Welcome to the show, John. We're also joined by Mickey Panayotakis, Managing Partner and Technical Director at Infamia, a top data security consultancy in the DC area. Mickey is an IT leader who specializes in associations, NGOs, and think tanks. Over a 17-year IT career, he has built, consolidated, and managed top-tier reliable networks, and his work extensively covers emergency management services. In addition to his work with Infamia, he volunteers as the IT director for Grassroots.org, a technology-based nonprofit, and is co-host of the Tech in 10 podcast. Welcome, Mickey. I am going to start with the lightning round. Number one, first mover or fast follower?
Fast follower.
Fast follower.
CIO or CISO?
Ooh, CISO.
CIO.
MDM or MAM?
MDM.
MDM.
BYOD or CYOD?
BYOD.
BYOD.
Containerization or virtualization?
Containerization.
Containerization.
And breakfast or dinner?
Dinner.
Dinner.
All right, we got some dinner, folks. All right, so both of you are our top thought leaders in the field. In your opinion, what elements of digital transformation in the enterprise are the most important right now for future growth?
Wow, elements of digital transformation. I think mobile is leading the way on digital in general. I've been doing some general thought on that, and I think part of the reason for that is not necessarily because mobile is moving faster on the production side, but people change mobile devices a lot quicker than they do servers and other hardware.
And John?
Yeah, I go to a little bit of a different slant. I would say that the biggest driver of future growth will be the ability for the business units to stop thinking in a silo approach. Everybody's been digitizing each kind of business function at a time, whether it's the customer engagement or the supply chain. But if you're really going to get there at the end, it's being able to think kind of across that ecosystem and break down those silos.
No, that's great. When you guys hear digital transformation, what are some of the common misconceptions out there that you run across on a day-to-day basis?
I think most people think that a lot of security and IT companies and departments aren't there to really help the company or the individuals move along. I think that's one of my, going back to kind of the people-centric approach and busting silos that John just mentioned. I think a lot of IT departments can do a better job of educating people, but I think that's the greatest divide that I see is a lot of, when I talk to individuals that aren't in the IT world, they tend to think that IT is there to just impose rules and make decisions for people that kind of, they feel the individuals that work not in IT feel they inhibit their work.
And John?
Yeah, so I think the biggest misconception I've seen is the thought that if I take care of the commerce, that transaction with my consumer or customer, that's going to be the answer to digitizing my landscape or the digital transformation. And forgetting that if you're going to delight that consumer, that you also have to take care of, whether it's your distribution business, your supply chain. And if you don't take care of those elements, you're going to miss out in terms of what that total customer engagement turns out to be.
Have you seen anything in your personal career that has worked on the enterprise to kind of break down the silos or to kind of mitigate that perception and then let people know that IT is here to help?
Yeah, I've actually seen two things. On the silo perspective, a lot of companies actually see silos within IT where DevOps doesn't speak to operations, doesn't speak to security. So one of the things I've seen recently is the concept of continuous security, where security comes in at the beginning of the life cycle, and we talk about security at the very beginning, at the conception of a product, and work on it all the way through the end. So I think especially within the IT and product management and project management, continuous security is a very important and interesting concept to me. The other thing I see that really helps is education and training. I think when people understand what the risks are behind some of the rules and policies we put in place, they're more likely to understand why we need them and work with us to resolve them.
No, that's really well said. And John, what are your thoughts on either breaking down silos or allowing people to know that IT is here, they're part of the team, they're here to help, that we're not just a standalone?
Yeah, certainly a challenge that I don't know if you probably go to 100 different IT organizations, at least 99 of them would say that's one of their biggest challenges. In my experience, a way to help break that down is the use of corporate level shared goals. Making sure that we're all lined up to the same objectives. And a lot of times, companies will focus on just financial objectives. We've done, here at Carhartt, really a focus on what are those key activities or transformations we're going after, and making sure that the entire senior leadership team has bought off on that, and understanding that we might be investing in one particular area over another because that is more important right now. And that takes IT out of that, let's call it traffic cop role, that they're saying we're going to do this versus something else. It's, this entire senior leadership team has made that decision and is putting their weight behind it.
Mobile's obviously a huge concentration right now. By 2020, 70% of the world will have a mobile subscription. Is this causing any restructuring at the enterprise organizational level? And if so, in what ways?
I don't think disruption is quite the right word by 2020 because we have been kind of dealing with mobile for a few years now. But I think mobile is a huge challenge, both now and moving forward, both in figuring out how to deal with IT security and IT within the organization. I know we mentioned before BYOD and CYOD, et cetera. One of the things that we as security personnel and security professionals have been doing in the past is we've been doing kind of what I call a 1600s, 15th century, 16th century dogma of security where we build walls and try to keep people out. And the problem with those is mobile devices go in and out of those walls and infiltrate. So learning to manage those devices and learning to keep things secure while still allowing people the movement that those devices allow them is going to be key.
Yeah, it certainly is changing how we think about serving that consumer. I don't know if it's necessarily restructuring organizations per se, but it's certainly changing that engagement model with that consumer. You're thinking about them being in your store, obviously with a mobile device, thinking about how you can engage them no matter where they're at in their life during a day. So that certainly is changing how we go about building capabilities, and the product owners and the executive team making sure that probably is the first reference point in terms of how we go about thinking about serving that consumer. So I'm not saying that we're making any kind of organizational level changes, but certainly an organizational level way of thinking.
How do our listeners decide whether BYOD or CYOD or another model is the right one for the business?
I think you can't start thinking with should BYOD or CYOD be the answer. That's not the first place where you go, especially when you think about security and mobile security. You have to think about that. But I think the first thing you do with security is you think about what is it that you need to protect and what are the possible risks and attack vectors and so on. So once you identify that and what access to those assets your devices can have, then you can decide on a more strict or more loose mobile device or device in general platform. So I think generally speaking, you have to look at what BYOD and CYOD offers, what levels of MDM you can have within the devices that are coming into your organization, and then looking at those, decide whether you can see yourself with acceptable risks with BYOD devices. A lot of times, again, with IT, we tend to think that they're inherently insecure and we don't really see what the benefits some of the BYOD devices bring to the organization as a whole.
So that's great advice. Number one, start off with what is it you're trying to protect. And then the second thing is look at the entire organization and their goals as they relate to it. And then that delves into whether it's BYOD or CYOD or another model. John, what are your insights on that?
Yeah, for us, that choice between BYOD and CYOD, really came down to a decision about roles and responsibilities in the organization. Certain levels in the organization, whether executive levels, highly mobile employees, we provide them that device, so they get to choose a device to use. But at the end of the day, how we treat the data from a BYOD or a CYOD is exactly the same. We're pushing down MDM to those devices. We're using containerization on it. So, if you look at what the price point of some of the high-end devices right now, I think as IT organizations look forward in the future, they'll probably restrict the CYOD to a certain set of devices that have a certain price point. But a lot of employees, the use of that mobile device is as much about their personal life as it is their work life. And I think there'll be further pressure to have a pretty wide policy for adopting any device. At least from big brands going forward.
No, those are good points. And then I think the listeners would be really interested to know, in your current organization, is it BYOD or CYOD? Is it a mix or is it another model?
Mostly it's BYOD. We work with a lot of international development organizations as well, and they have, when you're talking about things that we need to keep secure, they have staff that are overseas in countries that aren't necessarily very friendly to the causes they're trying to promote. So in those cases, we do have to take a more strict approach. And even though it is BYOD, we do have the IT department coming in and really looking at the devices they use and, on one-on-one level, instructing and discussing with the staff what the risks may be and how we can mitigate them.
Yeah, ours is a split between CYOD and BYOD. Our policy sets forth who in the organization is entitled to a company-provided device, but then we support everybody else who would like to access their information from their own device.
And then when it comes to mobile, what opportunity keeps you awake at night because it's so great? You're so excited about it.
Wow. With mobile specifically, I just see every iteration, every new year we have a new device, and sometimes they're just incrementally better, but you often have just huge steps in security and in adoption. Things like biometrics, which, before up until about 5 or 6 years ago, they're pretty limited in scope. Now, pretty much everybody I know has a mobile device with a biometric reader somewhere on it. Things like encrypting the entire device, which, again, 5 years ago, was not something that's widely done. And now, starting as with some of the new operating systems, I bought my new Samsung S8 phone this year actually, and it comes in the entire hard drive is automatically encrypted. When I log in, people can't access it. So that really, some of the security stuff is really what really excites me about the future of mobile, and the way the mobile is actually driving that as well.
And John?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's interesting is the potential opportunity to replace laptops for mobile use. If you really look at, for example, I just have been testing a Note 8 for the last week. And I really see the opportunity that I could travel, almost extensively and just use that device. If I just had a, kind of a portable, fold-up keyboard, and then I can mirrorcast to other displays. With the power that's in some of these mobile devices, and even with the potential folding devices that you're hearing about in the future, I can really see a situation where laptops go away and you've got employees that are mobile or just using a single device with them on the road.
No, it's exciting times, and the two you point out is that the advances in security have you excited, and also just the ability to go on the road and just replace your laptop, that you could just have the mobile device do everything anywhere. Conversely, What mobile challenge keeps you awake at night?
I think the same things that keep John excited, they keep me excited as well. All the processing power and everything else. What challenges keep me awake at night are very similar, though. The capability to have all this processing power in small devices that everybody has, and the ability to just download some sort of app that can somehow create something like a mobile device botnet. I mean, can you imagine just having all these, highly capable mobile devices being able to attack anybody from anywhere? That's a pretty scary thing for me. And the other thing is some of these mobile device security biometrics and so on. They're adopted fairly quickly without too much testing and foresight, not from the companies that produce the devices, but from companies who adopt them. So a lot of the times I see companies that just kind of rely on biometrics and scanners and Face ID and things like that have been known to not be secure in the beginning. So keeping an eye on what the latest and greatest features are and how secure they are is also important.
The one thing that I would say has me worried would be IoT type of devices. As you see the number of those devices and they all want to be connected to the network, and especially as some of those are directly connected to the corporate network, trying to manage those devices, I'll say devices, that's probably even an oversimplification there, those chips, and being able to watch for that and all the possible attack vectors that are going to be there in the future, I would say, that's probably my biggest worry going forward, is how we'll manage that ecosystem. And you can't not embrace it. So, I think the key challenge for us is what kind of management framework can we put in place over the top of that IoT environment.
It's interesting that the greatest strength or the greatest opportunity is also the greatest weakness, and I think that's a parable of life. And as you mentioned on security side of things, when it comes to mobile, how real are these breaches and how likely are they to result in a catastrophic, for lack of a better term, outcome?
How likely it is? It's very likely. How likely it is to be catastrophic? Usually less likely. But I think a company would be remiss to think that they can just sit there and expect that it won't happen. And I think every company should have a plan in place, both to deal with a potential attack as well as a response plan in place that they communicate with their entire staff.
If I stay on the mobile framework in terms of attack vectors and, what are the likely chances of a catastrophic event, I think, a lot of that really depends on what an enterprise is doing with mobile and what part of their landscape are the mobile devices accessing. So, if I look at what we're using it for, and what access points those mobile devices have. There have been breaches, or not breaches, just compromises. The big thing for us is how do we limit that impact? And right now we don't see a catastrophic opportunity, but that's something that we're watching, every day, and making sure that, folks are educated and understand, how they can protect the company's data. But the key thing is making sure that you thought about that data classification up front and understand what can be accessed in a mobile environment and what's so sensitive that maybe it can't for various reasons.
And then in staying with security for mobile, what are some of the most common risk factors when it comes to this in your mind? Is it lost or stolen device? Is it unsecure apps? Is it use of the public Wi-Fi? What should our listeners be prioritizing in terms of those vectors that could come in?
I think you hit the nail on the head for some of them. I think the biggest security factor in mobile, and even not in mobile, I think is human error or human fallacy in some ways. Either because, we click, human trust, really. We trust people too much. We trust each other too much. I was reading an article about reporters that try to infiltrate organizations, and they're successful because people trust people. And I think that's the biggest fallacy we have. The biggest problem we have is people trusting people and things that just look innocent. Things like plugging into a mobile USB charging station in the airport or somewhere. I know you may find one. There's a lot of stuff that people think, well, what could go wrong? I'm just charging my device, but you're also plugging a USB connection to your device. Things like trusting public Wi-Fi hotspots without protections like a VPN. I think those are the biggest, most easy to address things that I see in our work with mobile device security.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Trust being the biggest issue. People get used to how things work in their personal life. I go home, I connect to the Wi-Fi, I go to my friend's house, I ask for their Wi-Fi password, and I get connected. And helping people to understand that there are bad actors out there and they're looking to take advantage of that trust is our biggest challenge. And no matter how much education you do, you still have folks that fall victim to that social engineering challenge. So, I think it's going to be a continual battle and an education. And as soon as you educate people on the various techniques that are being used, those bad actors will come up with new techniques, and you'll have to educate them on how to not fall victim to those as well.
More and more, is that falling into your departments? Kind of this, for lack of a better term, public relations, where it comes to education, where you're out there doing training, communication, and also, how does that work? Do you work with a communications team to help you write it? Or how does it work when you're trying to communicate these various factors, especially when it comes to security?
Wow, there's a lot to chew on there. So we're talking about educating, generally speaking, in my work, we talk about educating staff of organizations. And that is an ongoing process. There's formal education periods when we say, this week or this month we'll do a seminar on this. There's also sort of ongoing as things come up. There's several security mailing lists that we all subscribe to. And things come up and we say, well, we need to educate people that this is an ongoing threat right now. And that is kind of an ad hoc training. So between the two, I would say education is at least, 10-15% of our load here. Now, do we work with other teams? Absolutely. We work both with professional education teams. So we try to bring in different educators every time. So we have a structured organizational approach. But we also work specifically with the comms and PR teams to sort of educate them on how to respond to any sort of issues to the public. So we work with the PR teams for the public-facing approach of security, but we work with all the staff directly for educating the staff on security issues.
Yeah, the responsibility for that IT security training does fall within the IT team. Certainly they get help from our communications team to help craft those messages, but we've got multiple levels of how we do that. We have an annual security awareness training that every employee, computer user is required to complete, and we get a very high percentage of that. I don't think any organization ever gets 100, but I know that our head of security was quite happy that he got 95% this year. We do a regular set of emails that go out on various phishing exploits or other exploits that people understand. So that's kind of a constant top of mind training. And those emails come out from the head of security directly. He sends those emails out to everybody. And then there's the ad hoc, kind of department level sessions that our team goes out and meets with folks. We also took an approach to try to educate the executives. And we've done that two ways. One, we assigned reverse mentors to a portion of the senior executive team. And part of those reverse mentors from the IT organization, they spent time on security and how to manage both their corporate world as well as their personal world from an IT security standpoint. And then, one of the best ways that we found to really educate that executive team was we did a tabletop exercise with them on an actual mock breach event and what happens and how everything works. That certainly has helped us tremendously to get a top-to-bottom understanding of the challenge that we're facing.
Now, when it comes to scale, we're always challenged with scale. And obviously, in the roles that you are as thought leaders within your organizations, you're in a unique position that you do touch every facet of the business. You touch every department. When it comes to creating mobile security in that scale, given the number of new mobile devices out there, what can we do to kind of get to that scale that we can grow accordingly with the organization and with the amount of mobile devices that are coming out?
I think we're lucky on some levels that, I guess as consumers we aren't, but as IT professionals, we're lucky at some level that mobile devices are sort of limited to the big three companies, So on that point alone, being able to manage MDM and containerization within about 2 or 3 operating systems really helps us manage the scale, even though the devices themselves are huge. But there's still a problem with the number of devices that come out and the different hardware that's out there. So trying to vet everything is nearly impossible as far as the individual devices go.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of really trying to, even though people are bringing their own device, it doesn't mean necessarily any device. and trying to give approved whitelist of, listen, you can choose any of these devices, and maybe they are from the top 3 or 4 manufacturers, and we're fine with whatever you pick. The other thing that helps from a scale perspective is to make sure you spend time thinking about the MDM solution in terms of 2 things: ease of administration for your team of administering the MDM, and then how easy is it for the end user to be able to use it as well. Because, if you don't pay attention to those 2 aspects, that's where the time sink comes in, is trying to administer everything or educating your end users of how do they actually use the technology as well. So that for us has been a key focus area, is to take away that friction, so to speak.
If you look at Cisco's 2017 annual cybersecurity report, or actually if you just look at their annual cybersecurity report from Cisco, is that they list out that budget, compatibility, certification, and talent are the top constraints when it comes to security. Do you guys agree with those results? And then more importantly for our listeners, how would you advise them to combat these challenges?
Well, some challenges like talent are industry-wide, and I don't think we can individually do much. Although what we can do as an individual is work with organizations that help promote education in cybersecurity so people can actually get the staff we need in the future. I think it's one of the issues we're having right now is a staffing shortage and also a lot of turnover. We see a lot of cybersecurity people stay in a company for 2 or 3 or 4 years and then leave. So I think that's an issue. I think the other bigger issue that we see is device updates and risk awareness. So I think those are the 3 things I would say are important. Now, how to address them? We talked about risk awareness. We talked about keeping sure the devices are updated. Maybe we talked about MDM.
Yeah, certainly Cisco's list is pretty all-encompassing. How do you deal with the talent, I think, is the big challenge for us. We've gone about it a couple ways. One, how do we partner up with companies who can provide us the thought leadership, can provide us, in some cases, managed services in that security space, and then we develop the security personnel ourselves. We'll bring in folks that maybe aren't at the highest level of maturity in the security practice, but I've got a great head of security, and he can coach and develop those folks. And if we partner them with industry expertise, managed services, for the security operations, we feel like that's a pretty good model in that talent space. As a company our size, we're never going to be the place for a security career necessarily. We're not going to have, a team of 50 or 60 security people that somebody can make a career there. So, we have to make it, so that this is a place you can develop yourself and either choose to stay in security or move into another part of IT. The other challenges that maybe aren't on the list that I see is the cross-functional impact that security initiatives can have in terms of new capability deployment. So, if you may have programs, initiatives that you've got going on, and security initiatives are going on at the same time, can really hamper those. So that conflict can put pressure on pulling back on security push. And then I'd say the last one that wasn't on that list would be, we talked about that auto update on the devices. Unfortunately, while that's good that it keeps it updated, it can break your MDM implementation. And those things are just coming automatically. And the folks that are responsible for, that MDM have day jobs. So you can miss those changes and the impact. And then you find out about it when your end customer is calling you and asking why something isn't working. So I'd say those are the other 2 beyond the Cisco list.
And you both mentioned talent. And John, I love how to use like an analogy, I know you're a Buffalo Bills fan, is that instead of drafting for we need that cornerback position is no, we need the talent, and then having the proper process and structure in place to actually train that talent. Switching gears real quick, just to kind of look at things, got excited about this, is that in the past 2 years, what's been a large mobile win that you're particularly proud of?
I'm going to go with, it's not so much a security-specific thing, but it's a privacy thing. And the fact that because of mobile and because of some high-profile cases, people are now having a real debate about privacy and security and how important it is to keep our files, our lives private, which of course has a big take on security, while at the same time, making sure that we have some ability for law enforcement to do their work. I think it's kind of a bit out of scope here, but I think that's a big part of it. The other is that I've seen in the past 2 years, and I think it's mobile-driven, is a big push to adopt the security protocols in all communications, TLS, SSL, and so on. And it kind of touches a little bit to John's point about how security teams sometimes may hinder product development. We had a case recently where it's fairly simple. We deployed an app somewhere, and people forgot to, in the development mode, they're not using secure protocols. So when we deployed the app, we had to really quickly go back and redeploy a new version that was able to use TLS. So that's another place where security mobile first plays in. And of course, security first would also have helped mitigate that problem in the beginning.
Rather than pick maybe a specific project, I think what I'm most proud of is just a change in mentality when it comes to that space from two perspectives. One is, having a mobile first mentality on projects instead of that being the afterthought. And then the other thing is to start having an engineering approach to that mobile space as well. How do I think about that from a full stack all the way from that app all the way back down to the infrastructure? So how do we make that experience for that user, to be optimal? And once again, I think just having those two kind of mentality, changes has a big impact on your go-to-market approach.
And then for our listeners out there, when they're looking at just the top 3 factors, so you just like boom, 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 what would be the top 3 factors when it comes to security that everyone needs to have in place?
I think the first factor would be train. Make sure your staff knows, make sure everybody in your organization knows and identifies the risks, knows how to mitigate them, knows what your plans are in case of an attack, knows how to communicate if there is an attack or after an attack. So that's the first one. The second one, although it's going to be very basic, is patch, with a few caveats that John was quick to bring in, things like breaking MDM, but making sure all the devices in your network are up to date and all the security holes have been patched. And I think the third one, I think it's equally important as the other two, is to really bring security in at the beginning of the conversation. That the whole security first, continuous security approach, where security is not an afterthought to be bolted on later, but should be discussed at the very beginning conversations of any project.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take from there then, if I take my 3. I think the first thing is having that alignment with your business colleagues about what you're trying to achieve in that framework. And what is the goal that we're trying to achieve? So that would be number 1. Second thing would be the data classification policy and how you're going to govern that data classification. And then the final piece is that, you've got that mobile policy and sign off from each employee. They understand exactly what their responsibilities are and what we expect from them, so that you've got that, real sign off each year. I see those as our top 3 things before we get to specific actions we have to take.
And then are there any security leaders out there that you think are doing things right, and what do you like about their approach?
I've given that some thought in the past few years or few months here, because security is an important aspect to all organizations. And my biggest heroes are the guys who really interact with all aspects of the organization. They look at security not just as a walled garden that people will put up the walls and people live happily within, but they look at the full ecosystem and try to engage the full organization, as John said, to get corporate buy-in, identify what the corporate goals are, as well as what the people goals are, and work on a cooperative security policy that works. They cooperated with the rest of the teams in the company to come up with a security policy. I think those are the kind of people that I consider security heroes.
Yeah, I like to think I have the best security guy. So Tim Macy, who's my head of security, he's really good. I mean, obviously, we're thrilled to have him on our team. The interesting thing about security heroes is, you probably don't know their names, because if they're doing a great job, you'd never hear about them.
After this episode, I'm going to print out shirts that have the Cheers logo, and it says Security Heroes, where everybody doesn't know your name. In terms of thought leaders, outside of security, just thought leaders, because you guys are 2 of the world's thought leaders. Who do the thought leaders follow? So I'd love to know anyone that you read, anybody that you follow. I know our listeners would really enjoy that.
I'll probably have to send you like a long list offline later. I think if I rattle them all now, it'll be over time. But, there's obviously some of the big technology thought leaders like Andreessen and so on. But what I really like to do is try to attend some of the conferences and see who, as John said, the unsung heroes, the little guys that have new ideas are. Like whoever the guy was that came up with the whole continuous security paradigm. I think that's a guy that I follow. And going to the security conferences, going to the small rooms and see what bubbles up from the ground up.
Yeah. I probably have, the same folks that most people follow. If you look at the PayPal mafia, whether it's Reed, Peter, Elon, any of those guys, it's amazing, so many founders come from one, organization, or Bill Gates or those folks. I'd like to say that I'm really self-actualized and I spend a lot of time reading about, IT and business after work. But, I'm not. On the way in the morning, I listen to Mike and Mike. And then when I drive home, I listen to Jim Cramer on CNBC. So I kind of cap sports in the morning, and general business kind of entertainment at night. And then, like I said, I fill in, just kind of whoever happens to come across, my Twitter feed or my LinkedIn feed.
Contrary to popular belief, we do have other lives.
As it relates to that, you've got to unplug, but then when you're there and you've got so much to do, especially when it comes to mobile and the explosion, for our listeners, how do you keep focused? There's so many opportunities. How do you narrow down which one you should be focused on? If you have any life hacks or tips and tricks?
I think the ability to manage this space is what really differentiates people that want to be a leader in IT and those that maybe don't, because there are so many things that are going on in parallel. You have so many different roadmaps. You can have application roadmaps, infrastructure roadmaps, security roadmaps. All of those things are running in parallel, and some things you're keeping warm, some things you're keeping hot, some things are cold on the back burner. And that ability, and I'd love to say that, there's some trick to how to do this, but it comes with experience. It comes with confidence, so to speak, that it's all right if something doesn't move forward, that you're comfortable with something, sliding back while something else moves ahead. The other thing is there's a really smart guy named Eric who said at a presentation once that you should make a list of the things you're not going to do to start the day. So I actually have used that as well.
Well, flattery will get you everywhere. Yeah, no, we call it the not yet list. So that's fantastic. Glad that it's being utilized out there. So as part of the mix we've talked about here today, how important is it to purchase devices that meet certain security standards? And what specifically should we look for in a device?
I think what specifically we should look for will vary from organization to organization. When you purchase a device, you got to figure out what your requirements are for the device and stick with them. And you should have a certain baseline requirements that these are what you need to do. And if a device doesn't meet those, sorry.
I'm a big believer in staying with kind of large established players and having partnerships with them. I'm not looking to save a little bit of money on a device. I'd rather, use Samsung as an example. You know that the device from an engineering perspective, support, everything is going to be there. If there's a problem, you know that it's going to get addressed. So that for me is the biggest driver. We're probably not going to stray away from, the top three kind of brands in the space. And that doesn't matter whether that's, from a mobile device, kind of a cell phone perspective or a Chromebook or a laptop. We're going to stick with the large players just because we can count on their support.
And Mickey, you brought up biometrics earlier. Are you guys implementing anything with biometrics? If so, what's the roadmap for that?
Right now, we're using biometrics primarily as a two-factor authentication. I do like that more and more devices or hardware manufacturers, I think Samsung is leading the way on some of this stuff, are including more and more options for biometrics, anything from Face ID to fingerprint scans. One of the concerns that we have, as I mentioned before, we have some teams that work overseas in places that may not be quite as free as we are here in the States. One of the concerns we have with biometrics is the ability to force someone forcibly to basically, for an example, put their finger on the fingerprint sensor. So we don't rely solely on biometrics for that reason. And there's also legal cases that we're trying to see how they play out here in the States and elsewhere about whether you can be forced to provide biometric information whereas a password you can remember and forget is something that may have different legal implications as well as different physical implications.
Yeah, we see biometrics as an alternative in our two-factor so we leave it up to the end associate to decide, do they want to use their user ID password or do they want to use biometric, whether it's facial or the fingerprint. But then the second factor is going to come, whether it's the text, voice call, or an app. So we see biometric as a big win for our associates because most of them didn't like putting in their credentials. So, they would rather use the biometric as one of the two factors rather than a password.
And as we dive deeper into trends, so we have biometrics, enterprise apps, and containerization obviously all work together. But if you're forced to pick one of those three, which one of those three would you pick?
I think especially in the mobile market, it's a toss-up between biometrics and containerization. With the two together, being able to secure your device and being able to secure your data on any device using containerization, I think is huge. So it's a toss-up for me between those two.
I guess if I'm pushed to choose, I'd say containerization, just from the ability to protect that corporate data, to not have that data leave the device, so to speak. I think is probably the biggest for us right now. With obviously, the other two are quite important as well.
For the sake of your time, we're going to wrap things up here with some fun questions at the end here. If you had to do some future casting, what would you say the future of security will look like within the enterprise in the next 10 years?
I think we'll have to move away from the walled garden approach and from raising walls and really look at security from the individual employee on up. My biggest concern with security in the next 10 years is in the currently vague world of quantum computing. If we manage to get a quantum computing working, then we'll have bigger security issues.
Boy, I could make a lot of money if I actually knew what was going to happen. So I think the biggest thing you'll see is a further consolidation between the networking providers and the security providers, to see that just being truly integrated, as an integrated offering, rather than the organizations having to pull it off together. You already see the start of it. And I just think you'll see that integrated approach happen at a rapid pace over the next 10 years.
And then for your teams, what book do you give them the most often? If it's not a book, what do you give them the most often? But if it's a book, what is the title of that book? Or if there's something that you hand to them or distribute, what is it that you distribute to them most often?
I think the one thing I distribute most often is a password manager. Anyone will do, I don't care which one you use, but a password manager is the first thing I ask people if they have, and here's ours, just use it.
And your password manager, is it an in-house solution or is it a specific one?
We use LastPass.
LastPass.
Yeah, it just works well with several enterprises that I work with.
So there's two books that I kind of recommend to folks. One is Slack, Tom DeMarco. So I think, a fabulous example for folks to really think about is you've got to free up space if you're going to drive innovation and drive other kind of groundbreaking ideas. And then another one is, most people have never heard of it, it's a Kanban. I'm drawing a blank on the author's name, so I'll apologize to him in advance. But same thing, teaching people how to use Kanban to lay out their environment, being able to manage WIP limits. And a lot of organizations don't really understand, maybe not understand what WIP is, and understand how that can adversely impact an organization.
WIP, I love it, work in progress. Also, it's always humbling as an author when people can't remember the author's name, so it's always good. What we talked about here today, mobile security in the enterprise. What's your concluding advice for our listeners out there?
My concluding advice is if you don't have a plan in place, especially if you don't have a incident response plan in place, go ahead and put one. You'd be surprised how many organizations we work with that may have a lot of policies, but they do not have a contingency plan and they don't have a response plan.
Contingency plan and response plan. That's great advice.
Yeah, that was one that I was going to say. So I'll pick a different one then. Have that alignment with the executive team about what you're trying to achieve. I think a lot of times people are focused on, the actual tactics, the actual execution, and not really having the alignment with their colleagues on the executive team.
I totally agree with that too. I think one of the reasons that we probably both migrated or tended towards the response plan is if you start thinking about the response to an incident, then you also start thinking about all the teams you have to bring in to respond to it. Anything from executives to the PR team to everything else. And I think that starts you thinking about how you can bring the whole organization into the security.
And then any closing thoughts?
My only thing I'd like to say in closing is to think more in every organization about continuous security and bring security in every project from the very beginning. I think that'll get buy-in from all the teams, and it'll also help mitigate problems in the future.
That was a good one. For me, I'd say my closing thought is there's never been a better time to be an IT leader. When you look at what the mobile world can bring and what can be done, no matter where somebody is at in the world, obviously that provides a lot of challenges, but that's what gets me excited anyway as an IT leader is, how can we change the way people interact with us as a consumer?
So you heard it here first, is bring in security at the very beginning, have it be part of the entire process. And it's never been a better time to be an IT leader. It touches every facet of the business. It's living, it's breathing, it's all about people, and that's what mobile is advancing at a hyper speed here. So we can't thank the guests here enough, John and Mickey, and most of all, to you for listening in today. Don't miss our next episode where we'll dive into how to approach biometrics and digital identity in your business. Of course, you can always visit Samsung Business Insights at insights.samsung.com for daily news and analysis of the IT topics that matter to you most. I'm your host, Eric Qualman. Looking forward to hosting you next time here at Business Disrupted.